So perfect timing. So about the American Community Survey. And as I mentioned, going to start out pretty basic. So those of you who are expert users, this beginning part is going to be a little bit of review, but I want to make sure everyone here has the same basis of information. So ACS is the nation's biggest ongoing survey. It's got the most current, reliable, and accessible data for local statistics on just a huge range of topics. And I'll talk about what some of those topics are in a minute. But anyone who does regional planning is using American Community Survey data for things like age structure, presence of children in households, veteran status, commuting, education, income, just tons and tons of data available every year. And why is there tons of data? Because this survey goes out to 3.5 million addresses every year. It goes out throughout the year. So surveys are going out every single month. Survey workers are in the field every single month. And then the Census Bureau is taking that data and compiling it into an annual estimate that reflects those surveys that come in every month throughout the year. So this survey is huge. It's used for a lot of purposes. It's also really important. Does anyone have a guess as to how many dollars the ACS was used to help allocate in terms of federal funds in FY21? Who thinks it was A, 900 million? Okay, I don't see any hands. 675 billion, 1.1 trillion, getting closer, 2.8 trillion. All right, those of you who answered 2.8 trillion are correct. So just under $3 trillion in federal funding is allocated based on the ACS in some way, pretty much every year. So there's a reason why this survey is as big as it is. It is also widely used, of course, by local communities, by policymakers, by advocates, by journalists, by business people, by public health folks, just tons and tons of uses in addition to that almost $3 trillion in federal funding. And it's widely used because there's just this wealth of topics in the ACS. Census data folks tend to think of the ACS in two big buckets. There are the population characteristics, and then there are the housing characteristics. And a lot of the things that we saw today earlier about labor force, about home ownership, about race and ethnicity was drawn from things like the census and the ACS. So for population characteristics, it's everything from ancestry and citizenship to fertility, presence of grandparents in the household, school enrollment, and veteran status. For demographics, age, Hispanic origin, race, relationship to householder, and sex. In economic characteristics, what they think of it as class of worker, but are you in the labor force or not in the labor force? Commute patterns, health insurance, and industry and occupation. And then on the housing side, computer and internet use, costs, and lots of different types of costs. What type of heating fuel you use, how many vehicles are in the household, what year was the structure built, and when did the household move in. So just you can think with these topics how many different questions we can answer with this survey. How do questions get on the American Community Survey? The Census Bureau, in order to get a question onto the survey, the Census Bureau has to have a federally mandated reason for asking the question, but those reasons change over time. And so they go through this 5-year cycle of coming up with proposals so federal agencies can request a new question to be added. And then the Census Bureau starts this sequence of steps where they request proposals, they start cognitive testing where they're actually doing focus groups and research work on if we ask a question in a certain way, does that resonate? Do people understand what they're being asked? Are we getting responses that make sense? Then once it passes the cognitive testing stage, it goes into field testing where questions are sent out to a subsample of that 3.5 million addresses every year and then there's a lot of research. What kind of responses did we get? Does it jibe with other administrative or other data sources or other survey data that are out there? And then they start doing that analysis, the evaluating the results after the field test is done. That process takes about 5 years. Once the evaluation of results is done, there's a public comment period where, okay, well, here's all of the research we did and all of the work that went into it. Here are the questions we're thinking of adding. Are there any public comments on how to add, when to add, whether to add this question? And Office of Management and Budget Clearance. And then the changes are implemented. So the whole thing from beginning to end is probably closer to 7 to 8 years to get a question onto the survey. There are several questions that went through that process, person topics, things like that, what they call the household roster, who's in the household, educational attainment, some minor wording changes, health insurance coverage, disability, journey to work, and income labor force and supplemental nutrition assistance participation in the person side. And then on housing, and this might be interesting in particular to people in this room, things like electric vehicles and solar panels, thinking about regional planning kinds of topics that might show up in 2025, condo fees, and changes to wording for home heating fuel. So there's this constant development process. The survey has been in the field since 2001, started testing, really in production in 2005. So long history, but this sort of periodic change cycle that it goes through. One interesting thing that has come up, and I should mention that that last slide and the one that I'm showing now are excerpted from a presentation the Census Bureau did at the American Community Survey Data Users Conference earlier this year. There is a new question. There's been a lot of interest in getting more information on sexual orientation and gender identity. But again, in order to get a question onto the ACS, the Census Bureau needs a request from a federal agency. They received that request from Department of Justice recently. And so they are planning to do cognitive testing and field testing on sexual orientation and gender identity questions. The really cool thing, I sent my slides over last week, and then yesterday I had to change them because the public comment period for that just opened. So yesterday, the Census Bureau issued what they call a Federal Register notice asking for public comment, explaining exactly what the structure of the questions is going to look like, and saying, do you have any feedback about how we're planning to do field testing for this question? So I would encourage you, the slides will be available after. The link about the Federal Register notice with more information is at the bottom of the screen. I highly encourage you to click on it, read it. If this is a topic of interest, submit your comments. The TLDR version of this is for gender identity. They're looking at testing a two-stage question. The first question would be, what was this person's sex assigned at birth? And then the second question would be, what is this person's current gender? The response categories for that one are proposed to be male, female, transgender, and non-binary. For people who answered differently for sex at birth and current gender, there would be a verification question, whether it's an online form or a survey worker interviewing you. There would be a verification question just to make sure that it wasn't an accidental checkbox and miscoding of people accidentally as transgender when they didn't mean to be. And there will be two different variations because there's some inconsistency in the research literature and in the way other surveys have implemented this. The Census Bureau tends not to have a check all that apply answer. Those of you who look at Journey to Work know this well. It would be really nice to know how people journey to work multiple different days, but there's only one. What's your primary mode? The gender question, it's sort of that same issue. They don't usually have a check all that apply option, but in this case with the field test, they're going to have one question structure where it says just check the one that applies, and there is going to be another one that says check all that applies. So we'll see how that one goes. In addition, there will be a question tested on sexual orientation that will ask does this, and it will have the name of the person automatically filled in for the online survey or by the field worker. Person think of themselves gay or lesbian, straight, that is not gay or lesbian, bisexual, and this person uses a different term with a write-in box for that. So one other key piece of information is that the current proposal that's been noticed in the Federal Register is that the questions will only be asked of people ages 15 and older. And that if you read the details, there are some more specific guidelines about how they will treat asking this question in cases where a person might not feel comfortable answering in front of someone else in their household. So highly encourage you to read it. Comments are due by November 20th. Okay, so that's really deep dive into where content comes from. And again, this might be a little bit of review for those of you who are ACS experts, but I mentioned at the beginning, data are collected throughout the year. Those from January 1st to December 31st of any given year, all of the responses collected during that time are rolled into what the Census Bureau calls a one-year estimate. Those are published for areas with 65,000 people or more. So whether you're a city or a county or a school district, if your population is above 65,000, you should have data in those one-year data products. For some places in population between 20,000 and 65,000, there's a more limited list of data products that are available from the one-year data products. And then every place, every census tract, every school district, every tiny county gets data in what's called a 5-year estimate. So that is taking everything from January 1st of 2017 through December 31st of 2021, for example, and pooling all of those survey responses into that one 5-year estimate. The typical release schedule for those, Kevin mentioned earlier that SCAG has a brand new report. I don't have the link on the slides here, but the link and QR code is available on this event webpage. The estimates for the one-year estimates are typically released in September, the supplemental estimates and public use microdata in October, and then the 5-year estimates in December and 5-year microdata usually in January. I mentioned some specific geographies, and one of the key things as we're thinking about data from the Census Bureau, from the American Community Survey, is the Census Bureau thinks about geography differently than many of us do. I've been working with the data long enough, I think, in this tree, but it doesn't necessarily come naturally. It's obvious, we have data for the nation as a whole. The Census Bureau breaks that down into states, and those states group into what they call divisions and regions. I think David this morning had some of his data grouped by census region, like the West and the South regions, for example. Within states, we have counties. A few states don't really have counties. Anyone who's ever been to New England knows that counties aren't really an administrative unit there, but the Census Bureau still publishes data for counties. And then underneath counties are a group of a geography called census tracts, which we can think of as sort of neighborhood level, and then block groups, which think about the city block that we're on. A couple of those put together would be a block group, and the data would be published for those. Then we're thinking, well, what about the city of Los Angeles? What about the city of San Clemente? Where does that data come in? That doesn't fall down that nice spine in the middle. That is groups of blocks add up to match that place or the school district or the congressional district. So there are these sort of side shoot geographies that are also available and published. So where can we get data? There are a couple of options. There is data.census.gov, which I allegedly can do a live demo, but we'll see. I'm going to walk through the slides first, and then we'll try a live demo later because I don't want to break anything. But if you go to data.census.gov, this is the Census Bureau's published tabulations for all of their statistics, those 1-year and 5-year data products I was talking about. There are sometimes I work on a project called Kids Data, where we also have a lot of custom tabulations, things you can't get on data.census.gov that PRB has either processed, or we have a special working relationship with the Census Bureau to publish some specific statistics on children in California. And then if you're an advanced user and you really want to get into developing your own crosstab, but you don't feel like writing your own SAS code or R code or Python code to do that, there's a neat tool through the IPMS organization that allows you to do some of those crosstabs online. And in fact, I think Dowell had referenced IPMS in his microdata work in his paper. So let's look at example number 1. So how has commute mode changed in Los Angeles? Kevin mentioned that, and this is Los Angeles County, that the SCAG region work from home share went down between 2021 and 22, but it's still up considerably compared to 2019. And you can see that in the far right-hand bars. The gray bars are the 2019, the teal bars are the 2022 data. Still a sizable share of the LA County commuters or LA County workers are working from home. Sure. Yes. Yes, that is correct. So that's one of the challenges with this question. The way that the Census Bureau asks the question is, what's your primary mode of commute to work? So if you work from home 3 days a week, you would be in that work from home category. If you work from home 2 days a week and you commute to an office or to a workplace the other 3, you would be in like the drive alone or the public transit category. It's a limitation with the way the Census Bureau asks this question. They have considered changing it. There have been requests to change it, but no changes have been implemented yet. We'll see if the pressure for that changes now that there's more demand for having some splits about hybrid work. But there's always, you can always send comments. So, and particularly again, because it requires a federal agency asking if you can send comments to like Department of Transportation and give them feedback that this is important information, they can be the ones to actually submit the request for the change. So where did this data come from? If we go to data.census.gov, and again, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm starting from like sort of the basic level and getting more complicated. You can do something as simple as put in a search term. This isn't always where I start, but can sometimes be a useful place to start. So for example, if I'm on data.census.gov and in the search bar type commute, I am going to get a whole bunch of tables that have commuting information available. The Census Bureau sometimes refers to this as journey to work, but they're moving more toward natural language and not making us know all of their like wonky, you don't have to know tenure to know owner renter anymore. The search term owner or renter should get this information. So if we put in the term commute, we can get to commuting characteristics by sex, which has the table that you see on the screen here. And then what we would want to do is find LA County. So in that left-hand nav bar, and again, it's a little bit hard that I'm not doing this live, but you'll see that in the left-hand nav bar, you can filter. And then if you filter by geography and we click on county, that brings up this screen here. And it will ask you, I don't have a screenshot of this one, but it'll ask you what state that you want. So we can select California. Once we've selected California, it gives us a list of counties. We can scroll down and click Los Angeles County. You can also look at multiple counties. So you could get all 6 SCAG counties all at the same time. And once we have selected the county that we want, the table updates and it provides us with the current commute characteristics for LA County. One really cool sort of pro tip is that once you've got that selection, you've got the table you want, you've got the geography you want, you've got the year you want. If you copy the URL that's in the browser at that point and save it, that link will always take you back to that exact table, which is a neat little trick. The other cool thing you can do is you can change and look at different years for the same table without leaving that primary screen. So there is an option just under the table title where it shows what years the data are available for. And if you click on that and expand it, it gives you all of the other years, 1-year and 5-year data products for that particular table. Okay, so the other neat thing you can do is many of you probably have, if you're data people, many of you probably have access to mapping software and can use that and build your own maps. But if you need something really quick and you don't want to load Arc Pro or anything like that, you can create maps on the fly to look at demographic or socioeconomic characteristics. So in our example number 2, what neighborhoods in Orange County have the highest poverty rates? So for this one, again, starting on data.census.gov, if you scroll about 1/3 of the way down that page, there is an option to build maps. And if you, from there, you click on Explore Maps, that brings you to the mapping tool. You can filter to select your geography. And again, in this case, what I want to do is look at census tracts. I want to look at them in Orange County. And so I've gone to that geography tool. I've gone to census tract. I have clicked, I've searched through to California, to Orange County, and then to all tracts in Orange County. And then I want to specifically look for poverty. And so I can put poverty in the subject to search. And it brings up the list of tables that are available at census tract that relate to poverty. Turns out that the table, and this is way too small for me to read it, B17001, I should know that number off the top of my head, but table B17001 has the poverty rate information I need. And so if I click on that, it automatically starts to populate a table on percentage of the population for whom the poverty status is determined. And then with a couple of refinements, we can change in the more, where is it? Right there, the more tools button. That expands a little context menu. We can change the colors. We can change the breaks between category ranges for the map and play around with that and get to the map that I had shown at the beginning with poverty by quintile with red and orange to red color scale instead of the blue one that is the default. And then for example number 3, Curious to find out what percentage of children in El Centro live in deep poverty. So deep poverty is less than 50% of the poverty level. And how does that compare to the county and the state? This is one you're not going to find on the Census Bureau's website. This is one you would either need microdata for. Microdata aren't great for cities because the geography that's published in the microdata does not align with city boundaries very well. And so this is one where, through special arrangement with the Census Bureau, the Kids Data website provides this information. So if you go to kidsdata.org, you can start on the data by topic page. Under data by topic, poverty is in the family economics section. So if we expand that, it brings us to a variety of different indicators on income and poverty level by city, by legislative district, school district, so on and so forth. So if I go to the Kids Data site by topic in family economics and click on by city, school district, children in deep poverty by city, school district, and county, that brings me to this page. The default is to have California and all counties on, but I can use that menu to select through to California, Imperial County, and El Centro and get the poverty data. Kids Data, this isn't the same chart that I showed at the beginning, but Kids Data also has a mapping tool that shows data by county. And then last, but certainly not least, for those of you who work in transportation planning or planning in any way and need to think about your outreach plans, one of the questions that's often asked is, what are the languages spoken? Which languages meet that threshold of at least 1,000 speakers? And you need to either provide translation services or translated materials for. And so if we're looking at what are the top languages spoken in Riverside County, this is another one where the data on data.census.gov doesn't have this level of detail. So it has some pretty broad categories. It has Spanish, it has Asian languages, and has other languages. That's not enough for your Title VI plans. And so in this case, what we're going to do is go to, you could either use microdata available from the Census Bureau and write your own code, or you can go to IPUMS. And they make all of the microdata available easily. Once you're on their site, there's this option to do online tool for analysis. And if you click on that, it will ask you to log in. They don't spam you. It's a free login. There's no commitment other than once a year, they want to know what kind of research you're using the data for. So once you've logged in, it will bring you to this context menu where you can look at data from different data samples. And we're going to choose the American Community Survey 2001 to 2021. The asterisk there just means the 2020 data should be used with caution. We all know everything was upended in 2020. The Census Bureau didn't publish any 2020 data on their website because the survey has such equity issues. There were so many lower income rental Medicaid participating households who were missed in the survey that they made adjustments, but they haven't published the data on data.census.gov. IPUMS has it, but says use it with caution. So we're going to click on that one, and it brings up this context menu, which is sort of a graphical user interface for building whatever crosstab you want. It's a really neat tool. It looks overwhelming when you first start to use it because you do need to know the variable names, but there's a really neat code book in the top, whoops, again with the trying to do live demos. On the site, there is a code book link and the variables are alphabetical. So if you're looking for occupation, you can click on the code book and search for the term occupation, and that'll help you figure out what occupation code or variable you're looking for. There's also a context menu on the left-hand side. There, if you know that you are looking for something about race and ethnicity, you can expand that menu, and that's another way to get to the race and ethnicity variables and to see what they have. A little bit of background on the IPUM site, race tends to be grouped. Race D is detailed, and that hierarchy with the D meaning you get more detail is pretty consistent throughout the site. So there's one category that's got bigger aggregations, and then one category that has like every response option ever made available. And so in this case, we want to know those really detailed language groups. And so we've looked through the list of variables that are available and found that language ED has the most detailed list of languages available. So I'm going to put that in my row column because I want a record for how many people or speak every one of the languages that are available in Riverside County. You can also crosstab. Maybe I wanted to know that by number of people in the household, or maybe I wanted to know that by the sex of the population. You can put that variable in columns so you can start building a crosstab. You can also filter. So I really only care about the current year. And so I'm going to do year and then in parentheses 2021. And I really just want Riverside County. Here's a place where working with IPMs gets a little bit more technical. They think of all of their geography data using geographic codes, like the FIP, if you're familiar with FIPS codes, those county identifiers. So I know Riverside County is 65. If you don't know that, just Google Riverside FIPS and the Postal Service or something, like the US government sites will show you what the code is. And then that has to be linked to a state because there's a FIPS code 65 in more than half of the states have at least 65 counties. So I need to say state 6, state FIP 6, because that's California, and county FIP 65 to get Riverside. That's all I need to do. Once I've got that, I click on run the table, and that gives us this tabulation of all of the languages spoken in Riverside County and the number of people that speak them. One other quirk, if you wanted to look at a couple of years of data, maybe you wanted an average from 2019 to 2021, can absolutely do that. I could have done 2019-2021 in that selection field, but you'll have 3 times as many people here. So if you have 3 years of data, you'll want to divide the results by 3. If you have 5 years of data, you'll want to divide these results by 5 to get an annual number out of those pooled years. But in this case, it's sorted by the code. Might not be the most helpful at this point. I would take the data and bring it into a spreadsheet to sort so that I can get the top languages spoken. So with that, that is super high level, very quick surface level on a couple of tools, data.census.gov, kids data, and IPMs that you can use to get at all of this rich potential in the American Community Survey data. I would highly recommend you to go to the ACS website and the Census Bureau website under the ACS page, which is census.gov/programs-surveys/ACS. And in the left-hand nav, there is a guidance for data users that has a ton of information, technical documentation, web tutorials, handbooks, statistical testing tools, if you want to get into that level of detail. And if you are using the ACS data often, PRB and the Census Bureau in partnership run an online data community. We joke that it's sort of like Facebook for ACS geeks, but way better because it's people who have used the ACS data in other places around the country and have questions and they're answering each other's questions. So it's a very collaborative, like, why I'm looking for data by block group in New Mexico. Why can't I find data in this table? And someone will respond back and say, well, there's this quirk about sample size, and then maybe that's why it's suppressed. And sometimes the Census Bureau staff will jump in and answer a question. So really great way to get to sort of crowdsource answers for really thorny technical questions if you want that level of detail. So I am going to pause there. And I hope I have, for those of you who are expert users, I hope I've given you at least a little bit of new information. For those of you who are new to this, I hope that I have gotten you excited about using the ACS. And I'm going to stop there and take questions. It was which one? Oh, yeah. Yes. So Diana, do you remember the wording? I don't remember the specific wording change, but that was the whole point. It was to get HOA to prompt people to include HOA fees when they're answering the question about condo fees. So it should be in the new question wording. Okay. So you could be able to then have.
Can you turn your mic on?
So you could be able to then be able to better understand where HOAs are in a community as well too.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. So you would know which block groups have a high proportion of homes that have HOA fees. That said, one of the other challenges in working with ACS data is it's a sample. And so it is going out to a random sample of households that tries to be representative. In any given, like if you see in a block group the share of responses that said that they have HOA fees going up and down, it doesn't necessarily mean that the HOAs came in and went away. It might mean that they sampled households in and out of an HOA within that block group. So a little bit of caution around interpreting change over time as being an actual change. But they also publish, I didn't talk about this, but the ACS also has these margins of error estimates that help you understand how much of the difference from 1 year or one data reporting cycle to the next is because of actual change and how much is just because of random sampling variation.
Great, thanks. And I think there was also an asterisk on that one that it wasn't included in the test.
Yeah, it wasn't included in the test because it was a language change that through cognitive testing, they didn't think needed a full field test. That it was clear enough they didn't feel like they needed to field test. It was just going to go forward.
I'm really interested in vacancies. And I was just wondering how they determine vacancies using their methodology. I guess it would be under occupancy, right?
So vacancy, and this is probably relevant for HCD too, just guessing. Vacancy is a little bit of a challenge. So vacancy can be figured out in a couple of ways. It can be figured out because the survey was sent repeatedly to an address and there was no response. So they send a field worker out and there's no one who answers. And then that field worker checks with neighbors, what they call a proxy response, and finds out that the unit is vacant. And then they try to find out additional information. Is it vacant because it's for rent? Is it vacant because it's for sale? Or is it vacant because it's an Airbnb, a Verbo, a seasonal, someone's second or third home? So they're trying to figure that information out. There is an additional step they used in the 2020 census, and they are using more often in the ACS to also look at other administrative data sources to see if they can, like, do they have evidence that there's someone living there? Are there tax records or utility records, those kinds of things that like sort of symptomatic that there's someone living there? If they have that, then they're more likely to continue sending someone out to try to get a response from the person or family that or household that lives there. If they don't have that, they might mark it as like administratively vacant instead of continuing to send someone to a spot that they think probably isn't occupied. But they're doing a couple of things. They're trying to figure out if it's occupied or vacant. And then if it's vacant, why is it vacant? I did that.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
All right, what else?
Oh. Hi, Andrew from the Census Bureau. Oh, both of these questions are really great. If you look at the ACS technical subject with Google's ACS, the subject definition, because even regarding this, you know, as you mentioned, for rent and not occupied, sale, so not occupied for micro workers, page 45. Subject definitions is a great way to both of those questions that were asked about, you know, any of these questions, like how are we defining it? Take a look at the technical docs, because it'll be specifically say, this is how we are measuring this question. I don't want to come up, but I want to know if I could just get some ACS wheels out.
Yes,
Thank you.
please.
No, this was great. I'm glad you showed the mapping function.
The mapping function is the most fun.
I don't know if I get it.
All right,
Fidget spinners for boomers.
what else?
Is it on?
Okay, it's great.
Can you talk a little bit about the breakdown of race versus ethnicity data and how you can combine that data so you can look at Hispanic or Latino origin in context of race data? We do that here at SCAG.
Yes, excellent question. So I mentioned that there's some data that's available easily on data.census.gov. The Census Bureau calls, if they do a table on home ownership, like owner renter by race, they call that a race iteration. So like owner renter for Black or African American, owner renter for Asian, owner renter for Hispanic Latino families. The challenge with that is those iterations are not mutually exclusive. So you have tables by race. So American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, please catch me if I miss one. American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Hawaiian Pacific Islander, African American or Black, 2 or more races, and other race. And then there's Hispanic Latino, which any one of the first 6 that I talked about also could be Hispanic Latino or not. And then there's also one for non-Hispanic white. So the only 2 that are mutually exclusive are those last 2, the Hispanic Latino and the not Hispanic white. Which makes it challenging because if you want mutually exclusive categories, you want to look at the Black non-Hispanic population, or so that when you add up all of the data, you get something less than, or something equal to your total population. Those are a challenge. If what you need is mutually exclusive categories, you probably need to go to a tool like IPUMS or to the public microdata to do your own cross tabulations and get the data that way. Because there you can use the race responses and the Hispanic origin responses and do mutually exclusive categories. Did that help?
You can use DCG for that. You can do disaggregated data. I'm a big.
Oh,
I'm a data check coming out in a week or 2 for Hispanic Heritage Month, but you can. I'll connect with you, but you can, in fact, I can do a map, disaggregate now, the Guatemalan community in LA County, or it depends, again, depends. But yeah, DCG does do disaggregated data, you can map it out.
Sure. Oh, Mike, please.
Oh, okay. Could I ask a question? This has been very enlightening and really thank you. With regard to, I mean, in my neighborhood, we have like rogue hotels there. How do they survey that? Because they go to the unit rather than, I guess, to individuals, and essentially it's like group quarters, or
That is a challenge with the way the Census Bureau thinks about how it does the survey, all of its surveys and the decennial census is through what they call the master address file. So, and a list of all of the addresses everywhere in the United States. They work in partnership with the US Postal Service. And I don't know I think SCAG helps with the LUCA process, the local, I'm gonna butcher the acronym, but the once a decade going through working with local cities, local counties to make sure that they've got the address list up to date. The challenge with that is it often misses unauthorized units. So illegal garage conversions, illegal ADUs. California has made it easier to get permits for ADUs. So maybe that problem will fade over time in the state. But for the ones that were built before that came in, how is the Census Bureau going to know that someone put their shed in the back is really a house? So they try to use that local knowledge to capture places where the US Postal Service address system might be missing addresses, but it's not perfect. And that's one of the challenges with that as the basis for collecting data. They have to have local knowledge of, well, this is a hotel, but it's really an SRO, a single room occupancy, like long-term residential hotel. They need that local city input to say, that should be counted as group quarters, or that should be counted as residences, and you need to enumerate there. So that's a really close partnership between the Census Bureau and local sort of local staff to get that. And there's some cities and some counties have the staff to really actively participate in that, and some do not have as much. So regional governments can be really helpful in sort of helping to staff those processes up, but it's an imperfect process. We have time for a couple more, or we could break early. I'm happy either way. I could stay here talking about this for days, as Diana knows.
On the topic of group quarters, actually, I was curious to know if we can use group quarters to estimate like the unhoused population in that non-institutionalized category.
Deep sigh, because this is like the perennial question whenever census or ACS data come out, is like, how do we, there's not one clear answer. The Census Bureau tries to count everyone and has specific operations for counting the unsheltered or unhoused population through the group quarters enumeration. In the 2020 census, that would have happened in September of 2020, but it's not perfect. Doesn't necessarily do a great job of capturing people who are unsheltered and living, for example, on street corners or on bridge overpasses. Group quarters might capture some of it. Definitely does not capture people who are couch surfing. So if a family is doubled up or temporarily living with, in someone's house, they may have just been missed because the person who is the primary householder think, well, they're just here for a couple of weeks and didn't necessarily count them. So the unhoused count is challenging. People who are living in shelters or people who are unhoused should show up mostly in that GQ count, but it's also missing a lot of people who are unhoused or have housing instability.
Yeah, in the
There you go.
Oh, great. In the most recent houseless survey, they found that actually in LA, that a lot of people live in cars. And I mean, I can show you on my block, but how do you get that?
That's that challenge of counting. When you have a data collection effort that's based on addresses, it makes it challenging. And the Census Bureau does have efforts through that, through the unsheltered count that they did in September to go to soup kitchens, to go to shelters, to have people walking in areas that are known. So theoretically, there should have been someone walking down the street, working with local city staff in Los Angeles to understand where those primary parking locations are. And I can think of a few places near the airport where there are like just, RVs, really old RVs that haven't moved in ages that just have lots of people living in them. But to identify where those areas are and to have census workers trying to do that count in person, but it's an imperfect process. And it's not just the Census Bureau that has a challenge with this. Anyone who uses data on the HUD point in time count knows that this is like just sending people out for one night and hoping that you've sent out enough volunteers to count all of the unhoused is not going to capture everybody. If you're looking on, I have moved toward, I think of those counts as like a floor, like that's the minimum number of people who are experiencing homelessness is that number. Data from the Department of Education on students experiencing homelessness has more comprehensive coverage because it's going to include, yes, students living unhoused, yes, students living in shelters, but also the students whose family got evicted. And so now they're living with a relative or a family friend or living in a car. CD is much more likely to capture that kind of circumstance because the schools are tracking what their students are going through. Again, not going to capture everybody. You only have the school age population enrolled in public schools, but has a better administrative count. And you get orders of magnitude bigger numbers using that than you do with any of the survey or address-based programs. Anyone else? I'm seeing smiles, but no more hands up. And so I would say, go to the Census Bureau website, the ACS page, and look at that guidance for data users, really helpful. And the ACS data users online community, also really helpful for keeping up to date, not just on what's going on with the survey, or if you have like a really wonky technical question, but also webinar announcements, event announcements, things like the Federal Register notice about the SOGI questions will show up there. So it's a good way to keep on top of what's going on. Thank you all.